Thank you. I hope all of you are having a good time. As the uh, moderator was saying, I have waded into very, very deep waters, and I am here, a man, interviewing four distinguished novelists, right? And the session is entitled The Joyla Club of Mothers and Daughters, right? Uh, so my first question to the organizers of BLF when they said I had to moderate this session was, I mean, I am probably the worst qualified person to moderate this session. I'm a man, of course, so I can't be a mother. Uh, Fortunately or unfortunately, I have two sons, so I have no experience of raising a daughter. The only experience I have is that I have a sister who has a daughter, and I have observed my sister mother her daughter. So that's really what I'm going to go with. I can't speak too much about how my mother brought up my sister. I was the son, she was the daughter. We were both whacked around almost the same. Me probably more than her, though she might disagree. So I'm going to try my best, and I hope you will have the patience to bear with me, and I hope all of you will be able to bear with me as well. Okay. Now, all four of you have written novels which feature relationships between parents and children. And so my first question is going to be a generic one to all four of you. Did the theme choose you? Did you specifically set out to write a novel on these lines, write about parents, children relationships, whether it is mother and daughter, whether it is father and daughter, whether it is mother and son? How did you come by these stories? A very generic question. I'll let you decide who wants to go first.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. I think you're the token male on the panel. I think that's what this is. They've stopped it from becoming a womanal. But to answer the question quickly, I think for me, the voice of my mother as the primary storyteller inside of my head, and also in general in life, was sort of really the tipping point in her stories of her growing up years, of her mother, this sort of matriarch figure that her mother was. That was really always with me, and I think in that sense, I think my mother was a very influential person in my choosing to become a storyteller as well. So that's possibly why I choose to write about mothers to begin with. And in terms of how this comes, I think sometimes it just is one of those mystical things that you hear a voice in your head and you're not exactly crazy, but you still hear that voice in your head and you have to chase that voice down to its logical end. And so most often I'm chasing that voice, these voices that are there inside of my head, and I'm trying to see what are they trying to tell me. I'm not loony, but I do hear voices sometimes. So yeah.
There must be a streak of lunacy. Novelists are, writers are. And I mean this in a very good way.
You are right.
For me, I think I do agree that there is a lunacy. And so for my case, my book is actually based on a real story where a mother does hospitalize her daughter who is not actually very sick, but she hospitalizes her because she needs a break and she uses a hospital as childcare. So for any of those mothers out there who have been tired and really desperate, I think that this story is a story that might speak to something deep inside, which goes back to Karthik's question, which is, did the story find you? Did you find the story? I think that I've learned as a female novelist that those of us who do become mothers inherently have a story. It's just whether or not we choose to pen it. And I think I made the decision to write mine down in novel form. And I think everyone who is a mother or father in here has that same story in them.
I agree about the lunacy, obviously. I think there's no point fighting it now. I think as far as the story is concerned, my mother's always been the biggest influence in my life. And when this story sort of came to me, it was not because mine is a dual timeline novel. So the timeline that I first was inspired to write was not a parent-child story. It was actually a love story. But over time, as it sort of unfolded in my head, this other thread sort of came into the picture of this girl searching for her mother. And I've always loved stories like that. I love these stories, the idea of going back into the past and trying to find someone and trying to unspool the threads of your own story through finding someone else's story. And of course, because the parent-child relationship is such a vital and critical relationship in everybody's lives. So I think those stories are very compelling. But having said that, I would definitely say the story chose me. I never feel like I came up with it. I always feel, and I think for any kind of artist, this is the best you can hope for, that you have that inspiration and you can sort of be a vessel or an instrument for telling the story the best way that you can.
I think I'll just jump on the bandwagon. I actually have a character named Looney, but it's not Looney, it's Luni. And you'll have to read the book to find out what her name means. But as Aishwarya said, right, like we're looking for vessels to tell a story, and my book looks at rupture. It looks at survival through rupture. And one way is you directly gaze at it, and the other way is you look at its mirror image. We do that a lot in science fiction, right? When we build other worlds, we look at the mirror image of something. That's why the title is Glass Bottom. It kind of talks about the fold of the outside inside. And the mother-daughter relationship is the perfect vessel for that, because you're looking at the female body that mirrors rupture at different time scales. So when a mother looks at a daughter, and looks at her body and looks at the ruptures that she has probably passed through but may not relate in a different time, it's basically time warping itself through two bodies that have some similarities, that have a similar terrain, but they may not exist in the same time span. So I think that's why the mother-daughter relationship was something that gave me a lot of space. It gave me a wide canvas to bring all these ecological, social ruptures into the vessel of the female body.
Right. So I'm just going to try and talk to you, all of you, about each of your books and try and kind of unpack the book a little bit for the audience. Your story, Thammika, like you said, is set in a hospital, right? That happens at some point in the novel. But what struck me about your story, though it's set in Singapore, both the main characters are Thai. As an Indian person, as an Indian man, I could kind of relate to a lot of what was happening in the relationship. So in that sense, there appears to be, I should say, an Asian way of parenting, or an Asian way of, or even an Asian relationship system, if you will. And as someone who has lived in India and of course is Thai originally, would you say I'm barking up the wrong tree, or am I?
No. So what Karthik is referring to, and this one's a big shout out to all the women in the crowd who have sacrificed so much of themselves. Karthik's referring to a scene where we find out that this highly intelligent woman has become a full-time mother, essentially because her husband tells her that ambition is useless for her. He looks at her straight in the eye and he says, "We have everything. Stop with your ambition. You can be my wife, just stop it." So for all of you out there who have gone through this, shout out to you and deep respect for what you've gone through, first of all. So yeah, they deserve a clap. They definitely deserve a clap. So this is a novel for all of you out there who have found yourselves in that situation where you are now in that and you know that you deserve better. Karthik is not wrong in saying that that isn't in the book, and it does have an Asian flavor to it, in my opinion, but it's not unique to Asia. I see it happening sometimes in more implicit forms all over the world. But when I drop off and pick up my daughter at a school in Singapore, for instance, I still see that the majority of people who are doing the drop-off and pickups are women who have sacrificed their careers in order to do the dropping off and picking up and not being respected for the labor that entails and the emotional labor of sacrifice. Sacrifice actually has a very heavy emotional labor to it that nobody really talks about in the way that it deserves to be spoken about. And there is an element, I think, of Asian family roles prescribed to who sacrifices in what form. And I hope that what Stanford Hospital does is it questions the ethics of that. Because I hope what it presents is the mental consequences on somebody, and it asks, are these consequences on a human who is clearly suffocating worth it for the sake of prescribing and keeping roles? And who even gets to prescribe and ascribe roles? And at what point does it just become wrong?
I mean, that's interesting. And what I noticed was he not only does he tell her, don't have ambition, and he very nonchalantly goes back to playing the piano. says that, and it's a really huge statement to make, and then he just goes back to playing the piano as though he's told her to get her a cup of coffee, or, it's just another everyday thing. Coming to you, Krupa, your novel is entitled Burns Boy. And while, of course, there is a mother-daughter pairing there, I noticed that the mother-son story was much, much stronger. And the story was being told by the boy, so to speak, in flashback, right? So, were you working at both levels? Were you trying to look at mother-son, mother-daughter? You kind of trying to do an all-round thing?
Yeah, my first novel, what we know about her was about, from almost sort of like taking the daughter's side in this conflict between, there is a narratorial voice that was sort of distant from the mother. And then as I was writing Burns Boy, I became a mother myself and then quickly abandoned ship and jumped to the other side and started playing for the mom side. And so I think this is also a little bit of a redressal of what the missteps I may have made in my first book, but that's just a joke. I think, as I was saying, the voice was always there. I knew that it was going to be a boy in the middle of. I actually knew the title of the book even before I sat down to write the book. And so I knew that it was going to be a boy, but I just also knew that it was just not going to be about him alone. So you also hear from the mother her story, and then you also hear from the daughter her version of the story, but the boy remains like this sort of central feeling. And I think I also wanted to sort of write about this I'm sorry to do this, but very Indian form of dysfunction and in the family, and this very extremely explosive mother-son relationship that actually exists in real life, as opposed to what we get in our media, which is either that the son is very reverential or henpecked or whatever else. There is also things that I've seen in which the mother is at the receiving end of the son's explosions, the son's anger, the son's rage. She becomes a sort of a sponge, and she's not allowed to say anything back, because how can you say anything bad about your child, especially your male child, right? And so I think I also wanted to explore that sort of rage, and I think where I was able to offset this sort of teen angst rage was also with being able to write later on about the mother's own postpartum rage, which is also something that you don't particularly get to hear about in our sort of world much. And going through it was, it was just the added bonus, I'd say, the cherry on top of the cake, but just sort of being able to, I'd written parts of it obviously much before, and then I went back to it, to the postpartum depression episode or the postpartum rage episode after I went through it myself, and I was able to, I'd say it was so much more raw, the wounds were so much more fresh, and I think I kind of even, just the idea of a woman's breast being stiff as wood after she has not been able to feed a child and has to go back to work on the day she returns to work, something like that I was going through. And writing about all of that was sort of also, I guess, me therapizing myself in some way as I wrote.
So did your writing change before and after you had a child?
I think it did, in the sense that actually now I know I've said extremely bleak things, but my book is not so bleak. There is some fun as well, and I'm actually, now that I'm the mother of a toddler, I actually want to write fun things, and I want to actually bring joy into my life and invite some more presence and sort of just, and what else are we doing? We're all storytellers. We're all inviting you into our make-believe world and saying, hey, listen, I made up this story, this loony voice that I chased, and I want you to just come be a part of that party, right? So I think I'm leaning more towards embracing that now.
Okay, that's interesting. Aishwarya, coming to your book, for the most part, your book features a father and daughter relationship, which is actually, when the book begins, not in a good place, which eventually kind of sorts itself out towards the end. And it's actually
No spoilers, Karthik.
Hmm?
No spoilers.
Well, but and in some sense, the mother and daughter relationship begins only towards the end of the book. right? So when writing this father and daughter relationship, how did you kind of figure it out? How did you kind of?
I think for me, what was really important to present through the book is this idea that family can mean anything, really. And I think because we tend to live in stereotypes, and we tend to sort of build our lives or build our happiness at any rate around certain boxes of, okay, a happy family looks like parent, the mother, the father, the child, and this particular kind of life and all that. And I think, and I'm sure that there are a lot of single parents out there in the audience as well, that sometimes actually it is enough to just have, to just be raised by your mother or just be raised by your father, and that life and our happiness and our relationships are really what we make of them. And it's not necessarily about, oh, it has to be this way. And if my life doesn't look like a certain picture, then I can't be happy. So that is why I sort of focused on this one relationship at first, which was between Arya and her father, Will, which, as you said, when we begin the story, is not in a good place. And as much as the story is about her finding her mother, because in the story, basically, she has grown up thinking that her mother is dead. And when her father is very, very ill and they think that he might die, is when he tells her, your mother is alive. And she is a sannyasi in an ashram in India. And this girl, Arya, has grown up abroad. She was born in Delhi, she was born in India, but she has never lived here. She left when she was a baby. So this idea of someone living in an ashram and being an ascetic and all is completely alien to her, as I'm sure it is to many of us, even if we live in India. So the whole story is really about her discovering her relationship with her mother, but through that also sort of understanding her relationship with her father. And of course, I don't want to give away more spoilers, but also to sort of realize that, yes, she missed having her mother, and if in an ideal world, she would have had her mother and her father and all that, but that the way that her father loved her it was more than enough for her to grow up with that sense of love and with that sense of security, which is really what we're all looking for, right, at the end of the day. So I really wanted to explore this and to sort of shatter those myths that life has to look a certain way and family has to look a certain way.
Coming to your book, set by the seaside, right? Two mothers, two daughters, who I think don't meet at all, right? So why the seaside? Were you trying to tell a larger story, and these two smaller stories are part of the larger story which the sea represents in some way?
In a very practical way, this book is written after a decade's worth of reporting on climate, and a lot of it was done by the seaside. So I wrote about the fishermen being evicted, because of the coastal zone regulations, and sea level rise being an issue. But if you look at it metaphorically, and that's why I chose fiction as the vessel, and I'm going to give you an answer that I arrived to very recently. So this is all like connecting the dots later after the deed is done. There's this book called Solaris by Lem Stanislaw, where people go up into space to find this planet, and there's an ocean on this planet. There's a sentient ocean on this planet. They can't figure out what the ocean is doing. They try to nuke it, they try to throw things at it, they try to understand it through all the data. It doesn't work. And they can only understand it aesthetically. And the ocean has a way that it penetrates the psyche of the people on board this spaceship, right? It distorts the psyche of the people. And when I was like thinking about my novel, the sea in Glass Bottom does that in a lot of ways. It functions differently for each mother-daughter pair. So for Gul and Earth, it's very intellectual. Earth, again, by the name, you can say that it rhymes with Earth, the planet, and in Hindi it means meaning. So there's this one character who's plagued by the collective memory of this planet. She'll be having dinner and thinking about some food crisis somewhere, or she'll be having dinner and be plagued by some pain point in the country somewhere. And she's somebody who's addicted to the news, so that could be something that's reflected in me because I'm a journalist. And when it comes to the other daughter pair, the Looney and Himo, it's very physical. So for Looney, again, I'm going to bring another filmmaker, Agnes Varda. She said if you open people up, you'd find landscapes, right? But there is a difference between the landscape you want to arrive at and the landscape where you find yourself. So Looney is someone who's not happy at the beach. She finds herself in discontent, and you'll find out why. But her daughter loves it. There's a tug. Himo wants to go and explore further, but her mother draws a line in the sea. And then there's a scene right early in the book, so it's not a spoiler, where Looney is doing some embroidery, and she listens to a movie that plays on her TV, and there's a quote that says, there's a dialogue that says, "Ye reet ka janwar yahan samandar pe kai ko marne ko aaya hai," which is a dialogue from Dharavi. Why has this camel? There's a camel that dies in the slums of Mumbai, and that you can tell that there's some trauma through the one dialogue she keeps memorizing. Is just this reet ka janwar yahan samandar. There's this landscape that doesn't belong to her, but she finds herself there. So the sea is this dearth of understanding. They're all trying to understand it through their own experiences, but they cannot. And that opacity protects the novel, but it also makes you want to reach out. It's that God and man thing, right? You want to reach out to something that you can't understand. And the sea does that perfectly.
That's very interesting. I'll have to read your book all over again now. Okay, I mean, when I was reading your book, Krupa, and your book, Thammika, this is, of course, obviously in hindsight. One thing I've noticed in common was rage, and both of you kind of put it. Your rage was very overt, very visible. Your rage was covert. You could sense it. It wasn't there in the sense that where the character was not actually articulating it, but you could sense it, right? So how does one portray rage? How does one think about it? How does one write it? Can one feel it and then write it? I'm asking you all kinds of writerly questions.
So rage is, after all the writers' festivals I've been to, I have come to the conclusion that rage is a female characteristic, and in an amazing way. Yeah, so for all of the women out there who are filled with rage, you are a woman. And I say it as a force that helps us to understand something. It's not a character, right? Rage is a data point for us to understand all the things that have been done unto us or through us without us saying yes to it. That's how I would see it. I see rage as an emotion, as a result of violation, whether that's mental, physical, or whatever. So to answer your question, how can rage manifest? I think that it has to be linked with what trauma response one has learned. So in my book's case, which is different from Krupa's, mine is the kind of rage that psychologists might call one from dissociation, where the character just intellectualizes to a good degree and dissociates from her own body and becomes an observer of the things that happen to her as she mothers her daughter or performs the role of a wife. She's looking at herself almost like a third person because she cannot fully inhabit her body. But that is the result of rage that needs to be dealt with and processed. And it's, in this case, it's processed through dissociation, dissociating from one's own body and experience, almost saying, this isn't me, this is just a life I am performing. That's how mine works.
Right. That's very interesting. For me, I think just as with where the story comes from itself, and I think while writing about rage, I think I'm also looking at rage as something that's happening to somebody as opposed to something that they are performing. So just the same way as pregnancy and motherhood are also, it's something that you're doing, but it's also something that's happening to you. This bewildering thing is happening to you as well. And I think that's what I'm most interested in, as rage as something that's happening to the character who's displaying that rage. And as it flows through them, what ruckus are they creating around them? How are they sort of unsettling the balance around them? And sort of how are they trying to find control? How are other people around them trying to escape this rage and this control? I think these things are sort of interest to me because as I was going through postpartum, or as anybody who's been through PMDD or severe PMS can tell you that sometimes it's something that's happening to you as much as something that you are wreaking havoc on. So I think that is sort of like the trigger point as somebody who sort of suffered through some part of this involuntarily through no volition of my own. I think I wanted to investigate that aspect of rage.
Okay. That's very interesting. Coming to your book, if I were to find one or two words for your book, I would probably say longing and loss, right? Am I right? Or do you want to add more adjectives? Or do you find my reading of your book very, very shallow. I'm a man after all, so forgive me.
Well, since you edited my book, I would hope your reading of it was not shallow. But I think, yes, longing and loss are two words that would, I think, be heavily associated with the story. Because the story also, the way I was inspired to write it was that I had this moment of inspiration during the monsoon of Delhi, which, if any of you are from Delhi or have you been to Delhi, you'd understand the monsoon is very atmospheric. And I know you grew up there and you spent time there, so you understand this. And sort of the whole pivotal scene of the book just kind of unfolded in front of me, where I could see this avenue that I had walked along, and I sort of heard this girl humming, and I promise we're not loony, we're not really loony, but I did hear her humming, and I could see this sort of figure in white walking along and sort of lost in her reverie, and this other figure who was watching her, and all the emotion and the just the mood of that scene just sort of came to me. And it was about love and longing and loss. And it was because the story is so inspired by these flowers that bloom a lot in the monsoon of Delhi, the mulsari flower. And I was smelling the fragrance of these flowers as I was on that walk. And I also felt that that fragrance also sort of encapsulated this whole mood and these emotions. So it was sort of like mirroring the cycle of a flower, where there's a bud and then it blooms, it blossoms, and then it dies. So it's also like that cycle of love, where there is love and there's longing and there's loss. And I think that's why I think also, as I said, when the inspiration first hit me for this love story, but then when I tried to start writing it, or when I thought of writing it, I knew that there was another thread, because this kind of love and longing and loss is not just about a romantic relationship. And that is what I really wanted to represent through the book, the idea of different kinds of love and how love can be expressed in different ways, whether it's between a man and a woman, or in any kind of romantic relationship, or between a parent and a child, whether it's a mother and a daughter, or a father and a daughter, or between friends. So I sort of wanted to really evoke those emotions, and I feel like the whole act of writing this book has just been to try and encapsulate just that one scene and that emotion of that one scene, where I felt like the whole story was contained within it.
Okay, I mean, if I were to try to describe your book or the emotion that I felt, given what you've said and so on, there was a sense of impending doom, right? Which I think fits in very well with climate change and all that's happening and so on. What's happening in Delhi, everyone's reading about. But I'm sure Bangaloreans have felt that this has been an unusually cold winter by Bangalore standards. And it has to do, I'm certain, in some way with climate change and so on. So the adjectives that I could think of for your book was impending doom. The sea, of course, can be very powerful, as many of us realized 20 years ago when the tsunami hit us, how powerful it can actually be. So am I right in thinking on those lines?
I think every reading of a book is valid, but I'm going to go off what Thammika said. So she believes that rage has a feminine value. In my book, I look at the quality of witness, and I think the quality of witness is a feminine value. I call it the feminine fold. Because if you are living today, you are a witness. There is nothing like an amoral bystander anymore. And as a witness, there's coping and care. These are the two things that come out when you're witnessing something, right? Whatever catastrophe that happens, given the world that we live in, it folds into you in some capacity. Whether it's a flood, whether it's a cyclone, whether it's cold temperature, whether it's bad air, it folds into your body. And what do you do with that? How do you cultivate care in your life? How do you make sure that fold doesn't unravel you completely? So I think the book deals with the quality of witness at different levels. Like, these 4 characters are witnessing social, ecological, and physical rupture. So this is, again, I don't think you can spoil Glass Bottom. But there's a cyclone, there's a storm that passes by the town that, in most climate stories, you'll have this one giant storm that undoes everything. Nothing like that happens in the book. It passes by. But Looney and Himo are in the cyclone shelter. And Looney's having her period, because that doesn't stop for anything, right? So she's having her period, she's in pain, and there's a storm whistling outside, and she doesn't know what to do with herself. And she's a beautician. So she starts making eyebrows. She starts threading the eyebrows of the other women in the shelter. It's as simple as that. So, these are the different qualities of witness that I wanted to include. That's very domestic, very maternal, but also at a bigger scale, that's earth. And she's completely overwhelmed by the idea of that colossal idea of witness, where you're looking at the tsunami. There's a tsunami in the book, different stages.
want to say that.
Yes, there's a tsunami in the book. It has impacted me personally. I covered the 15th anniversary of the tsunami as a journalist because I was in Sri Lanka a long time after the tsunami, and I couldn't go into the waves. My friends were like, let's go in, and I just saw the waves rise in my psyche, and I just couldn't go in. So the only thing I knew then was to go to ground zero and report on the story. So I think if you want to know or you want to understand the quality of witness, I think Glass Bottom could be the starting point for that.
I'm going to ask a larger question to all of you, considering the fact that all of you are women novelists writing about women and so on, right? The world is undergoing a rightward shift, right? And a rightward shift does not only mean we become more religious or go back to so-called family values, conservative values and so on. It also means, and it's already happened in America, they are going to come after women's, so freedoms and liberties and so on, right? So how then, as novelists, as writers, as women, empowered women who have enjoyed liberation for a long time, how then are women going to take this shift? And at least in America, it seems to be coming on with all the force of a tidal wave, and perhaps it will happen in other countries too. How are women, in your reckoning, going to resist this?
My first novel, some part of it is set in the 1930s, which is another time when rightward shift was sort of...
But women weren't so liberated back then.
Yeah, so even in that, at the end of every letter that my protagonist writes, she's making a note of what Hitler's doing and what is going on with the war. I think just as she said, as witness, right, that is actually a very powerful thing to do. And being able to remember, being able to talk about it, and being able to write about it, I think is really, being able to speak about it is really the first thing to do, because there's, how many spaces are there for even, forget about just women writers, any writers to talk about this in LitFest in India as well. So I think what we have in our hands is like a really serious job, and even in this story, which has nothing to do with this, there is I have two instances in this new novel as well, in which there is, you observe the rightward shift of the world, and you sort of report it. And I think, as I'm also a journalist, and I also write about the climate as well, so I was able to really relate to this, both the sort of fascist tendencies as well as this climate denial and the sort of suppression of women's voices. All of these are sort of just feeding into each other, and you can see this coming. But I think we have come so far in India in terms of bringing our rights this far. It would be a shame if anybody were to lie down and take it, and I don't think it's going to happen. I think women are going to sort of be the brave voices that call out. If the revolution happens, I think women will be just out there, right at front, leading it. So that is my reading of it.
I think for me, the wording of your observation is already contains the problematic bit, because it was phrased as a passive verb. Women are liberated, women were liberated, which it sat with me as if women are the ones being liberated upon, being the ones on the passive end of being liberated, who is actually holding the power to free us. And if it was somebody else who held the power to free us or to liberate us, I don't think we actually were or ever will be liberated, because anybody who has power, usually, if not most of the time, will be more than happy to take that power back as soon as it's inconvenient to them. And we do see that happening, and that's what you are referencing. So as long as the phrase stays, women are liberated, or women were liberated, I think we have a problem of lack of liberation and equality. And so to answer your question, what roles do novelists have, or where do we go with this? I started, my gut feeling wasn't even very intellectual. It was like, well, if you're a woman, just first of all, surround yourself with the right men. And I think it starts as simple as that, right? Like, you have a choice of which men are around you. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But as long as you have a choice, choose wisely is where I'm at right now. Yeah, and many more. And apart from that, I would say that as novelists, we hold the power to the pen. Publishers hold the power to the gates. Publicists hold the power to the microphone. So within all these steps, if you really want to talk about women being liberated, we have to make sure that the voice is actually with the women in the process from all stages.
Very good. Thank you.
I mean, I agree with you, Thammika. I think that women have to always understand their own power. And I feel like in today's day and age, we also tend to look at a liberated woman as a certain stereotype of, okay, a woman who's liberated dresses like this, she talks like this, she's super aggressive, she drinks, she smokes, she parties, she's promiscuous, this, that, the other. And sure, there are women like that, but I think that there are liberated women of every shape and size and color. And I think that a woman who's living in a village, who's living as a housewife, can also be empowered and liberated in her own situation and her own circumstances. I don't think that a liberated person, woman, man, anything, only looks like one certain thing. And I think that's a box that we need to break out of. And as a novelist, I think that something that's always been a pet peeve of mine with a lot of stories, whether it's a book or a movie or whatever, is these female characters who don't have agency. You know, where I feel like in a lot of stories, you have these female characters to whom things happen, you know, and even in terms of the story, it's like, oh, she's going along and then this happens and then that finds, and she never really wanted to be thrust into this, but then this happened and that happened. So I think for me, it's always important to write female characters who have agency, who can go out there and choose what they want, and who can make things happen for themselves, and who don't have to sit back and wait for things to happen. Like, okay, if my goal is this, I want this in life, then I am going to take the steps to make that happen, and I don't need to wait for life to happen to me. And I think it's very important to have more female characters like that within the pages of our books and also in real life.
I think these are great answers, and I stand by all of you. I'm going to give you an example, right? So this is both nonfiction and fiction. I'm going to wrap it up really quickly. When I went to cover these houses that were demolished because they were fishermen houses, they were too close to the sea, there's nothing remaining. They're just like broken walls with giant holes and concrete. But then you see a clothing line connected between these ruins, and you see clothes there, wet clothes, you know, and you're wondering, like, and they look like prayer flags because there's nobody living there. But there's somebody coming in, maybe at night when nobody's looking, or when the authorities are not there, and putting their wet clothes there to mark that this was their home sometime, and it is the woman of the house, right? So this is part of the story also. So if you look at any revolution, if you look at any protest song or movement, you can look, there's one thing that you can look at the loudest voice in the room, and sometimes it is the woman, but look at the architects of these revolutions, right? The farmers' protest was influenced by Shaheen Bagh, which was the women who came out, right? In the book, it's the women hanging these wet clothes on these lines to mark their territory. It's the women in the cyclone shelter planning a revolt, but not understanding what to do, so they're planning to put a piece of the hair in the food of a politician's son as a way of marking their agony. So you should always go back and see how big revolutions are made. You know, when you look at civil rights in the US, of course we have Martin Luther King, but we also have Fannie Lou Hamer. And if you don't know about her, you must read about her. She's a great civil rights activist, not discussed adequately, I feel, in our discourse. So there are women that they're always been there. They may not be the loudest, and it's our job to do the work of, you know, the dissection, the excavation, and bring that story into the contemporary times. And I'm going to tell you something that I do as a writer. I feel that as a writer, it is our job to be brave. We may not be brave as civil individuals in life, but the late poet Alice Notley said, "Never write a false poem." You know, don't do that because you're lying to yourself. So I take an alter ego, like a lot of celebrities do, right? Yes, Sasha Fierce and all. And my alter ego is the Joker. is the jester, and because the Joker is the only one that can laugh at the king. So I always write keeping the Joker's hat. And a fun fact, my mother sewed a Joker's costume when I was young as a fancy dress competition that I won. And I think that stuck to me. So I'm a mix of the jester and the journalist a little bit. And I keep that to keep the book.
Terrific. Maybe one or two questions? One or two questions? There's a question here and there's a question there. You can take the mic from Aishwarya.
So, this question is basically about the relationship between daughters and mothers. So, as a Gen Z, I think that because of the information we have now, we are more insensitive, or like we are more suppressed to emotions, and we speak and behave that way. So, this mostly affects our mothers. So, I was wondering what all you guys' takes is on the Gen Z and the relationship with their mothers.
Yeah, just yesterday I had a chat with a friend who's also a writer, and we were talking about how much we have to learn from the younger kids and how much more they know and how much braver they are and how forthcoming they are. And so I think that's where I come from. I feel like even from my son, I'm learning how to not have social anxiety, how to sort of be more brave and be out there. And I think if we are open, I think there's actually a chance for something really wonderful with the younger kids out there. I think they're pretty smart. I find them way smarter than I was at that age.
Your question, ma'am?
First of all, thank you so much to all women panelists who have really inspired us through their talks. My question is directed to Sonali ma'am, since I have read Glass Bottom. In your book, there is the mother-daughter equation is not stereotypical but realistic, which is very difficult to crack. So there is love, but there's a lot of silence in between, and in that silence we can feel that love, but that discomfort of silence is there. It's not comfortable silence. So how do you balance this tenderness and tension in your mother-daughter equation?
I think a lot of it comes from personal experience. Like I am the daughter to a great mother. We are two sisters actually, and I can never claim to understand my mom. She befuddles me regularly. I always go into my room like, what is happening? Everybody asks me like, why didn't you write about your dad? I said, I can, but it's probably gonna be easier to do that. My mom surprises me, shocks me, angers me, I cannot put a finger to what she is to me. And I think that is why you have that, the silences are there, the tension is there. Like Arth is mad at her mother, but she's the one who comes to save her when things get really bad, right? Looney and Himo have that, right? Himo is almost a photographic remembrance of her trauma, but she is her daughter. Like, what do you do? Do you wish away your kid? You can't do that, even if that trauma is there, right? So we all have that in our daily lives, and this book is about the failure to understand and yet care. If our empathy is based on total understanding, we will always hit a roadblock. Right? When we care about something, when we care about a war happening overseas, and you say, yeah, well, it doesn't affect me, it's because you're trying to totally understand it. You should be able to love and care without the need for complete understanding. And I think the mother-daughter bond teaches you that every single day.
I'm sorry, we don't have time for more questions, but they will be still here. So on that note, thank you so much for being a wonderful audience, and thank you to the organizers for giving me this session. As a man, I cannot tell you how grateful I am. Unlike these illustrious women here, I am at a loss for words. Thank you.
Karthik, these women are so good, even I am at a loss for words.